to the INFOWARS Nightly News. It is Friday, May 16th, 2014, and I'm Leanne McAdoo. Well, apparently local news stations have been given the directive to convince their small town folk that an over-militarized police force is totally fine. There's nothing to worry about. It's for your safety.
Tanks, guns, armor, all tried and tested on the battlefield. Now some of it is here in central Indiana on our streets, being used to keep us safe.
Some of our local police departments are now armed for war.
To keep Hoosiers safe at a time of escalating homeland violence.
Plus, you have a lot of people that are coming out of the military that have the ability and the knowledge to build IEDs and to defeat law enforcement techniques.
Did you hear that? They're preparing for the veterans, your likely domestic terrorists. That was a local news station coming out of Indiana. They're there convincing the people that they need these tanks and all of this weaponry from Afghanistan because of the domestic unrest in the country. Where are they? It's Indiana. What are they talking about, domestic unrest? We've been reporting about this all along. Police are arming themselves to fight against your average American citizen, conservatives, patriots, and definitely returning military. Why aren't people seeing this? Well, perhaps because their local news stations are massaging it into their brain that this is completely normal. And I'm curious if there are other stations out there in other cities that are also being given this rhetoric to spill out to people in their cities. But notice how there's no mention from the sergeant that he's trying to protect his town from the Mexican drug cartels that are running rampant all over the country as the DEA just covers for them. Nope, they're just letting you know that it's the returning veterans who've sacrificed for this country, who have the knowledge of how to build an IED, that are the potential terrorists. Those are the real threat. Now, the sergeant admitted that when he drives through the town, people are frightened and they say, "Why do you need this military vehicle? Are you here to take our guns?" And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Not yet, not until he's given the orders. And of course, this just correlates with the federal rhetoric that's just trying to line up this public point of view that returning veterans are the threat. So it basically doesn't make any sense when you see the tyranny training facility there at Fort AP Hill. Basically, they're training the troops to be comfortable firing upon themselves when they return back to the streets of America. They're training them to be comfortable and desensitized on the streets of America to fire into a bank or fire into a church or to a fire station. And who are the likely domestic terrorists when they return? The veterans, the troops. So hopefully that's a big wake-up call to the military. But basically they're using you to fight their dirty wars, and then they treat you like Al-Qaeda when you get back to town. Now, we've got leaked documents that show another urban training center in North Carolina was indeed built after a U.S. town. It looks nothing like a foreign combat zone. It looks like small town America. The document is entitled Military Operations on Urban Terrain Collective Training Facility. It details the specifics of a mock 30-acre town located on Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. It was originally built in 1990. But of course, they've had some upgrades to the facility, including a Baptist church, a police station, and several farmhouses. They've transformed this quote-unquote international town. Now, these upgrades to the facility perfectly illustrate how they're trying to shift the public perception to view conservatives and veterans as likely domestic terrorists. They're training the troops to fire into Baptist churches because these people are the threat. And according to a 1989 press release, it mentions that the facility's original structures included a high school gymnasium where they could house evacuees, or it could be used as a detaining center for prisoners of war. Of course, those are the same exact things, really, when we're talking about FEMA camps. Now, the Department of Defense is training troops, of course, to see supporters of individual liberties and states' rights as extremists, basically being desensitized to fire upon American civilians during times of civil unrest, which is pretty insane because it's the globalists who are causing this civil unrest. And so they know it's coming, they're preparing for it, and of course they've got to prepare the troops to follow orders. And then you have your small-time news stations who are just preparing all the cities and towns to just be completely okay with this and to not worry about the fact that all these big military vehicles are rolling into town armed for war. It's for your safety. That was like the most aggravating report, seeing that. And please, if you have any footage from your local news station where they're trying to desensitize you to the over-militarized police force, please send it in to showtips@infowars.com, because we really need to put together a little montage of this psyop going on. But basically, look at what Brazilians are going to have to be dealing with when the World Cup comes next month. They've got RoboCops, actual RoboCops. It's a 400 RoboCop-style military police are going to be patrolling the World Cup in Brazil. They resemble exactly the cops that were depicted in the 1985 cult classic film Brazil, in which a totalitarian government rules a dystopian society with a bureaucratic iron fist. Now, the men are part of the elite BOPE unit of military police who regularly operate in Rio de Janeiro, and they're usually on 24-hour standby dealing with terrorist threats. But now they're going to be dealing with football hooligans who step out of line. Now, Brazil, of course, is currently being rocked by riots, strikes, and protests across the country because demonstrators are outraged at the cost of the World Cup, while things like their school system and other sectors of their society have been neglected in order to stage this soccer tournament. But this is just a perfect example of how civil unrest stems from people just being fed up with all of the government corruption. And so that's exactly an example of what they know is coming here when people here in America finally get fed up with all the corruption and all of the misrepresentation, but also the fact that reality is now far scarier than any dystopic future that was created in a science fiction film. I mean, that is frightening, that we have gone beyond Soylent Green, beyond 1984, Brazil. Here we are. But you don't have to be a fancy World Cup cop to get your very own military gear. Here in America, you can just work for the United States Department of Agriculture. The USDA apparently is soliciting for submachine guns. This is according to a solicitation on the FedBiz Ops website. USDA is set to purchase an unknown number of submachine guns. The solicitation reads, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Office of the Inspector General, located in Washington, D.C., has a requirement for the commercial acquisition of submachine guns. Now, it goes on to say how tricked out these machine guns need to be, including a 30-round magazine. But hey, I thought those were bad news, but apparently not for the guys there at the USDA. They need a 30-round magazine. Now, the fact that the Law Enforcement Division of the United States Forest Service isn't mentioned in the solicitation gives rise to the question, where will these guns be going? Who at the USDA needs submachine guns and night scopes and all kinds of triggers that will allow them to have gloves on? And is anyone seeing where this is going? We have police and government agencies that have no business having submachine guns, arming themselves to the teeth, being training the troops now to fight against Christians and patriots and returning veterans and anyone that has a conservative viewpoint. The globalists know they're outnumbered, and that's why they want to keep us in our slumber, lest we wake up to the reality of the power we have in numbers. We outnumber them, and we are mighty. We are mighty people. Just look at what happened this week in Clark County, Illinois. The people there stood up against the Park District Board. The citizens confronted them over allegations of corruption. So in the face of that, the board was like, oh, I'm sorry, the public comment section wasn't on the agenda today, and they quickly moved to adjourn their meeting. Well, citizen John Kraft then informed the board that he was making a citizen's arrest of the members as provided under Illinois state law. Now, the Illinois law requires that public bodies allow citizens the right to make comments, whether or not the public comments are on the agenda. Now, a sheriff arrived on the scene and agreed that they were within their rights to make these arrests. And that's exactly what we need to start doing at the local level. It's in our local government where we can really make the most change. You've got to know your rights, know what the laws are, and then, you know, obviously corruption trickles down from the top, but we can also hack at it right at the root here at the local level, just like the citizens who stood up against the heavily armed Bureau of Land Management in Nevada. New Mexico County, they've also voted to defy the federal government after they restricted access to watering holes. Now, in Nevada, the excuse was the desert tortoise. In New Mexico, the Federal Forest Service fenced off a 23-acre section of land to protect the meadow jumping mouse. Right. Now, don't get me wrong. Rodents are vital to the ecosystem, but again, the cattle had been grazing there since the 50s, and as you know, the West and New Mexico is experiencing extreme drought. So cattle need to be able to reach whatever water source there is, and the residents were frankly getting very fed up because it was literally killing their cattle. Now, earlier this week, the county commission voted unanimously to empower the sheriff to open a gate, and it made way for some 200 cattle to get to the water. Now, of course, as we've reported, the drought in the western half of the country has caused the U.S. cattle herd to shrink to 63-year low. And of course, what's the effect of that? The price of beef is skyrocketing. It went up more than 6% in just the last year alone. Now, it would have been worse, but ranchers have been slaughtering some of their cattle in order to thin their herds, in an attempt to get through the drought. But if the drought doesn't end, the price of beef is going to keep going up. And we also are reporting skyrocketing costs for shrimp, pork, and chicken. So again, back to dystopic themes. I mean, it reminds me of the movie Soylent Green, where even the elite and the super rich couldn't afford a slice of beef, or when a slice of beef came about, it was very rare that they would even be able to buy it. And that's where we're headed. And rather than try to fight this and try to help, we have people like Dirty Harry Reid who are shutting off access to the grazing rights for the cattle out there so that he can build his Chinese solar farms. But when he's not busy doing that, he's busy trying to take down the Koch brothers. But this time, he's proposing an amendment to the Constitution. He is trying to change the First Amendment's free speech protections. He's going to be overturning the Supreme Court precedent and giving Congress the right to limit who can spend money in elections and how much they are allowed to spend. Now, Reid, who is known for using complex parliamentary maneuvers to block amendments, has accused Republicans of blockading the Senate in order to reward the Koch brothers. And now he says to combat their influence, a constitutional amendment is necessary. Reid says the Koch brothers, no one else is pumping money into the shadowy campaign organizations and campaigns like they are. There isn't even a close second. They are doing this to promote issues that make themselves even richer. Now, this is coming from Harry Reid, who has a billionaire backer of his own, and he routinely will block energy bills that have to do with fossil fuels and only supports the energy bills that are going to put money in his pocket and his billionaire backer, which is, of course, alternative energy. So come on, Harry Reid. Now, the Democratic strategists believe that if they convince swing voters that it's this big money and this influence of that big money in politics is the key reason for the rising inequality, it could help have these voters swing in their direction, saying, the economy is rigged against them and it's only for the wealthy. And we hear that every election cycle. Now, I don't disagree with that statement, but come on, it is corrupt politicians on both